Here's the bracket. Everything kicks off Friday night with that 7-10 game between Notre Dame and Indiana, and then the three other games will follow on Saturday. We are going to give you a super preview and a complete breakdown of all four matchups here on CBS Sports HQ over the course of the next hour. And we have three cold weather matchups to get you going. That one game down in Texas going to be good weather, 62 degrees in Austin for a couple of warm weather teams, Clemson and Texas. But Indiana and Notre Dame, 22 degrees at kickoff with a slight chance of snow on Friday night. Those two teams, of course, dealing with the cold weather in their late November games. But SMU has to go to Penn State. SMU is not a cold weather team. Their average kickoff temperature this season, over 72 degrees. It'll be 25 degrees or so at kickoff. And cool for the Buckeyes, taking on Tennessee in the 8-9 game. Tennessee's biggest game in almost a generation. You got to go back to the Philip Fulmer era for a game this big for Tennessee. They're trying to take over the stadium at the Horseshoe, and if they do, is that going to be all for Ryan Day at Ohio State? Penn State is going to do a whiteout. Maybe we'll get whiteout conditions as well. It doesn't look like that, but it has been snowing in the area the last few days. James Franklin's team gets that 6th seed taking on SMU and Rhett Lashley in a noon game where they are going to have a whiteout there. Penn State an 8.5-point favorite. In Notre Dame, South Bend, Indiana, this is where you'll find the most expensive tickets for first-round games. Fighting Irish hosting in-state, I don't want to say rival because they never play. They haven't played in over a generation, Indiana and Notre Dame, but they're only separated by about 3 hours in the car. Notre Dame and Indiana have just been bludgeoning opponents all season long. That's only a 3-hour drive separated by 200 miles. You see that Tennessee-Ohio State game, really very similar. You can drive 362 miles or take a short 1-hour flight or so. Clemson in Texas, that's over 1,000 miles, and so is SMU and Penn State. But we want to focus in on that matchup in the great state of Indiana. We have Chip Patterson and Richard Johnson joining us here as we focus on that game to start. Curt Cignetti has been pretty outspoken about how he believes they should have a home game. But Chip, you're only driving a few hours here. You're in state. Is this as good of a draw that you could have gotten for a road game in the first round, you think?
No. I think Notre Dame Stadium is going to be live. I think that this is going to be a home field advantage that is significant. And I think that Fighting Irish fans, when they've considered the college football playoff, have always considered that this was going to be something they were willing to trade for that potential bye into the quarterfinals to be able to get a unique on-campus environment. Now, would the weather play a bigger role if they were welcoming in an SEC team or a team from the more southern parts of the United States? Absolutely. Indiana is not going to be fazed by the temperatures. But I do think that for the Hoosiers, one thing that they get in terms of this matchup and in terms of this setting is the opportunity to try to buy things up. And we have seen from the Indiana fan base such a remarkable investment in the success. I don't know if you all have seen the shots of the stadium for the opener against Western Illinois, against the way it looked against Washington to the way it looked at the end of the season. But they really showed by showing up, by making noise, by treating their football team like it was a serious football program, a willingness to be able to jump behind Coach Sig and everything that they've seen with this football team. So I do think the red will pop in Notre Dame Stadium. But I'm also expecting that they're in South Bend, the Fighting Irish, particularly when they're on defense, they're going to have a lot of noise at their back, too. These
are the two one-loss teams in the first round, and they're matching up against one another. Those losses are not created equal, though. Indiana losing to Ohio State. Notre Dame, Richard, losing to Northern Illinois. Now, I mean, a lot has been said about that game. Many thought that was going to keep them out of the playoff, but the way they have played since then, has anyone been more impressive than Notre Dame?
Chris, you know, the funny thing about Notre Dame is, of all programs, Notre Dame should never, and I mean never, be able to fly under the radar. But they kind of are this season. That's what it feels like. Your point is well taken that the Northern Illinois loss is embarrassing, as bad, as ridiculous as any loss any title contender has taken this season, or even going back a few seasons before that. But since that loss, Notre Dame has been a different team. They have crushed just about everybody they play. USC gave them a game Thanksgiving weekend, and Louisville did back in October. But other than that, Notre Dame has really demolished just about everybody. You know, I was on hand to watch them play Army, and even before they scored the 14th point in that game, once they blocked a punt in the first quarter, you're like, oh man, this is going to be over. And they do it with a brand of bludgeoning defense. Marcus Freeman has been able to get that side of the ball ready to roll. I do worry about Notre Dame if a game script demands a shootout. If Riley Leonard has to go shot for shot with Curtis Rourke or Georgia the next week, I do worry about that. But if Notre Dame's able to control the game script like they have basically every week since that Northern Illinois game, it's going to get late early for the Hoosiers.
Yeah, that game script note has me thinking about one of my favorite stats about Notre Dame this year. They are 93rd in third down conversion. That's not good, but guess what? They face the least amount of third downs of anybody. They don't even get to third downs. They get first down, second down, first down, first down, first down, second down, got another first down, explosive play, touchdown. I mean, they have been so efficient with the way that they use this offensive attack, which does have a little bit more success through the passing game than you might think, that does utilize Riley Leonard's dual threat ability to always stay ahead of the chains. And so while they are not, again, as I mentioned, very good in terms of their third down conversion percentage, the fact that they never even face third down shows you why they are one of the nation's best scoring offenses. So that's going to be a real key, because if you let Notre Dame dictate the game script, like what Richard was saying, if you let them stay on schedule, stay ahead of the chains, you're just not going to stop them. And guess what? Once they get rolling, they are ruthless and relentless. They had backup quarterbacks throwing it 17 yards down the field in blowout games. They've got an edge to them that I think will help them in the playoff. And
what they've done is they've gotten up big. They force teams to have to come from behind, and then they start pressuring those quarterbacks. They pressure top 15 rate in the country. I think they're number 13 overall in the country, pressuring about 40% of the time on defense. On the other side, though, Richard, you've got a quarterback in Curtis Rourke that's number one in several categories when he's facing pressure. So what's that cat and mouse game going to look like?
Well, he better be ready, because Big Howard Cross up front for Notre Dame, one of the best defensive linemen in college football, first-round draft pick. He's going to be back, you would expect, ready, rip-raring to go up front for Notre Dame. The combination of him, Riley Mills, what Notre Dame has up front is formidable. You ask any quarterback, even all the way up to Tom Brady, the edge pressure is one thing, but the pressure up the middle from a dominant defensive tackle, a dominant defensive line coming in your face is serious. It's really hard to deal with. It changes the way a quarterback navigates the pocket. It makes it really, really difficult to step up, drive, get power behind throws. Curtis Rourke is going to be dealing with a totally different type of pressure in this game. We saw that he did not handle that well. Indiana did not handle that well against Ohio State. They drove down the field first drive of the game, and then Ohio State defensive coordinator Jim Knowles said, I got something for you, Playboy. And they came after him all afternoon. And it got ugly for Indiana on offense in the second half of that game. Really hard for them to move the ball in the passing game in that game. So, and they were also stoned, Indiana was, up front in the second half against Michigan. So dominant defensive fronts have caused Indiana's issues. They were able to get out of the Michigan game with a win, but obviously they lost against Ohio State.
This is the closest spread of the first round. It's 7.5. Chip, I want you to give us a pick for the game and also tell us who advances as well if you're picking the favorite here. Notre Dame with the longest active cover streak in the country, 8 straight and looking for 9.
Yeah, Chris, I got like 3 or 4 picks for you. We'll just start to roll through it and see how it goes. Okay, so I do think this is going to be a game that Indiana hangs inside the number. I think they cover that spread. I've got the Indiana plus the 7.5. I think they've learned their lessons from what they need to do better, and that is early down success against Ohio State, against Michigan. They put themselves in too many 3rd and long scenarios for Curtis Rourke. I think the time off allows them to prepare for that, and that's where I trust the coaching. I also am going to go slight lean to the over. The score that I've got right here is Notre Dame 30, Indiana 24. So at 54 points, slight lean to the over. I just think both of these offenses are so good that once they get rolling, they'll be able to have a little bit of a leg up. And then finally, I'm going to go back to the well because I think the well still has water. Indiana in the 4th quarter because they're the best 4th quarter team in America. And if I've been betting Indiana 4th quarters all season, why should I stop now?
I'm going to take Notre Dame to advance out of this. I'll also take them to cover, but give me the under here. I think it's going to be cold, blustery, windy, run the ball, tight game, 24-13, something like that, and the game goes under.
All right, and the winner of this game moving on to face number 2 Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, a Georgia team that may not have Carson Beck. We're going to preview all 4 first-round games here on CBS Sports HQ. We'll do it a little bit here. They'll go even more in-depth over on the Cover 3 podcast as we get closer and closer to kickoff of the first 12-team college football playoff, the first on-campus games in playoff history. Up next, we're going to Columbus. Is this the final game for Ryan Day? Well, if the Buckeyes don't win, it might be a deep break on that one. Looking ahead to Tennessee and Ohio State from Columbus. Ryan Day, last time out on that field, was watching his players trying to rip away the Michigan flag being posted at midfield on the Buckeyes logo. Ohio State a 7.5-point favorite in this game. Ryan Day has not fared well in huge games. He's 1-4 against Michigan. He's lost 4 straight there. Only 1-3 in his college football playoff head coaching career. And Josh Pate on the pod talks about what happens if Ryan Day loses this game.
All hell breaks loose if they lose against Tennessee. I don't know exactly what that entails, but I think the opportunity for the dynamic to come off the rails is real there. I mean, Ryan Day losing his job is what I'm talking about. This is not a stance that I have. It is not a stance I'd support, but that is not my program. So it's really not my business whether they were to make a move on him or not.
Yeah, it'd be hard to swallow. 4 straight loss to Michigan as a huge favorite, and then a one and done in the college football playoff. We've got Chip Patterson and Richard Johnson with us. Chip, piggyback off that. What happens if Ohio State loses this game?
There's not a faith that Ryan Day can help Ohio State compete at the level that it wants to compete. The level that Ohio State wants to compete is beating Michigan and winning championships. By failing to beat Michigan, the Buckeyes have been prevented from competing for the Big Ten championship, something that they do value very highly in each of the last 4 seasons. And even when they've still been able to make it to the college football playoff and compete for national championships, they have, albeit with some very difficult circumstances, Marvin Harrison Jr., a missed field goal, fallen short of those expectations as well. I believe an Ohio State fan who tells me that in their eyes and in their heart, it is national championship or bust. Like, forget just one and done. It is go and win the whole thing, or else there is going to be a serious lack of faith in Ryan Day. He took over a program that was winning at an extremely high level. He took over a program that held a long win streak against the Michigan Wolverines. And so if you have a situation where in that very same stadium where you lost to the Wolverines as a heavy favorite, if they lose to Tennessee as a favorite of more than a touchdown, there will be a lack of faith that Ryan Day is going to be able to get the Buckeyes to where they want to be. Now, what happens with that lack of faith? Because Josh and I do share this. It ain't my program, and I'm not expecting them to be sensible, but I'll call out a scenario that we just saw in Lexington, Kentucky, where a Hall of Fame men's basketball coach just found it untenable to continue based on the vitriol that he faced on a day-to-day basis. I don't know whether it's the NFL, I don't know whether it's another college job or how it happens, but if Ryan Day loses on Saturday night to Tennessee, I do not think he is the coach for the future.
I do not think Ohio State should fire Ryan Day, even if they lose on Saturday night. And I know that that's a hard stance. I know that a lot of people are going to disagree with that because a lot of people at Ohio State are going to be out for blood if they lose that game. I think that in college sports, it's really easy to just fire the coach. In sports in general, it's really easy to just fire the coach and say, we'll get a new regime in and we'll figure it out. It's a lot harder to stand behind the guy and devote more resources, allocate more resources to him, and find a way to come together as an organization to get where you want to go. I know that they've changed out the defensive coordinator, bringing in Jim Knowles a couple of years ago. Ryan Day gave up the controls at the offense, gave it to Chip Kelly last year to bring that in. And they've got a tremendously talented roster. At some pieces, it's about as talented as money can buy with what they did through the portal last year, adding a Caleb Downs, adding a Will Howard, adding a Quinshad Judkins, and it hasn't panned out. I think you try to run it back probably with a different quarterback, then you go get in the portal and you try to do this again with a lot of the same parts to the team. You're going to have some guys who are going to go to the draft. You understand that. You're Ohio State. But for the most part, you can get, especially through the portal, some different pieces and try to do this again. To me, Ryan Day has been so close to the ceiling that for me, even though it is Ohio State, I'm not so sure it's so easy just to chop and change a coach out and figure it out. USC and LSU would like you to know that it's not so easy just to throw a bunch of money at a new coach and go add water instant championship.
Ohio State is upset because they're not winning these big games. While on the other side, Tennessee hasn't even played in a game this big since Phil Fulmer was the head coach there. You got to go back 15 plus years. Richard, are they ready for the magnitude of this game?
I think their defense is. I think their fans are on social media with what this little checkerboard Ohio Stadium stuff they're talking about, which I'm really getting a chuckle about. But I don't know that their offense is because I don't know that their quarterback is. Nico Iamaleava has struggled this year. He's struggled to hit the deep balls. He's struggled against drop 8 coverage where defenses only rush 3 and they make him be accurate on time into flooded zone coverage in the passing game. Nico has missed deep shots in the passing game, in the vertical passing game. And with that Tennessee offensive system, the vertical passing game is really what makes this thing go. If they didn't have Dylan Sampson at running back playing as well as he was, I think Tennessee would be in some serious trouble. But they have Dylan Sampson, they have a really good defense, and they've been able to kind of navigate, besides the loss to Georgia in November, through this slate unscathed after that embarrassing loss to Arkansas. But I'm just not so sold on this Tennessee team. When we get to picks, I'll talk about it. I just don't know that they have enough to go shot for shot with this Ohio State team if this thing gets into a track meet or any semblance of it, even in bad weather.
You saw those numbers since 2007. They've lost 21 straight road games against AP top 10 teams. Many of those have been blowouts. They're getting 7.5 points here at the Horseshoe Chip. Who do you like? What picks do you like? And who advances in the bracket?
Ohio State's the better team in a simulation, on paper, in the models. College football ain't played there, and it certainly ain't going to be played that way on Saturday night when everything is weighing on top of the Horseshoe, when all of those fans are feeling the weight of that moment and the weight of what it means for the future of the Ohio State football program. If Ohio State plays to its potential, they win this game and run away with it. My pick, my best bet, is that they won't. Is that they will play down to Tennessee. And that allows Tennessee's strengths to come to light. Tennessee's defensive line that Richard was just talking about, getting pressure on Will Howard, a quarterback who, by the way, has a lot of whoopsie-daisy king inside when he's under pressure. It allows them to shut down the run game in the same way that the run game was shut down by Michigan's defensive line. It's for those Ohio State offensive line issues to come back up and all of a sudden be a real difference maker. Guys, I've got Tennessee covering the spread. I've got Tennessee advancing, and I feel like it's a lot of negativity here, but I think Tennessee is just good enough to pull it off, and I just do not trust Ohio State to be as good as they are on paper.
I got Ohio State. I got Ohio State covering. I got Ohio State by 2 scores. I think with multiple weeks to plan for this game, cream will rise to the top, and cream is Ohio State. I think Ohio State's defense is the thing we haven't really talked near enough about. Nobody, and I mean nobody, outside of Oregon has been able to do anything against this Ohio State defense. I don't think Tennessee is going to be that team. Buckeyes move on for me.
Speaking of Oregon, that's the matchup. If Ohio State wins this game, they go to the Rose Bowl. They face an Oregon team that they almost beat in Eugene. That's the only potential regular season matchup that we would get in the first or second round to this point. We've seen that game, Chip. What if it's Tennessee, though? What would Tennessee against Oregon look like?
Oh, Oregon rolls. Oregon is more well-rounded, more well-balanced. As Richard mentioned earlier, Nico has not been good, and this passing attack is 12th out of 12 in terms of pass EPA among the 12 college football playoff teams. And I just think that the Ducks really don't have a lot of weaknesses. In fact, the only weakness that I was able to find for Oregon was third quarter scoring. Because everywhere else, they're one of the best teams in the whole daggum country, running, passing, defending the run, defending the pass. I think that the Ducks are in a position where they are huge Tennessee fans, because Ohio State beating Tennessee, especially the way that RJ just had it right there, is Ohio State living up to the reputation, maybe for only the second or third time all season long. If they can bring that rhythm, if they can bring that confidence into the Rose Bowl, then Oregon might be in trouble. If it's Tennessee, I think the Ducks just motor through them and advance to the semifinals.
Richard, you said you see Ohio State winning by multiple scores in this game. Moving on to get that rematch with Oregon, what do you think that rematch would look like in the Rose Bowl?
Hard to beat a team twice, but a total toss-up. Remember, Oregon only won that game by 1 point, primarily because Ohio State ran out of time. Oregon was able to do some things to steal some possessions back and gain some edgewise advantage. I think Ohio State could take it the second time around, though.
All right, we'll see. It's maybe the most interesting first-round game of them all, with everything on the line in the playoff and maybe Ryan Day's job on the line as well. Ohio State 7.5-point favorites against Tennessee. Winner to the Rose Bowl, and then the winner of that might be headed to Arlington for the Cotton Bowl, where our Cover 3 podcast team will be on, I believe it's January 9th or so. Chip Patterson will be there. When we come back, we'll move on to a matchup between shades of orange, Texas and Clemson. And what do the Longhorns do at quarterback? Should we see more of Arch Manning? Back on CBS Sports HQ, the Texas Longhorns getting ready to host Clemson in the CFP. Right now, the #1 ranked incoming recruiting class for next season. They've got things rolling in the playoff last year, the 4-team playoff, and now hosting a playoff game. And they have 2 former #1 prospects at the quarterback position. It's a great problem to have if you're Steve Sarkisian. What do? You got Quinn Ewers. You got Arch Manning. Both have shown that they can really help your team. A lot of people think that they have the answer, but Sark doesn't want to hear it via the Rich Eisen show.
I try not to consume myself with what y'all think. We focus on the task at hand, and that's doing what's in the best interest of the team to win ball games. If I kind of led the emotional roller coaster of what other people think, I'd be an emotional nightmare, because in one aspect I can read one article that says Quinn's the greatest thing since whomever, and then next article is why don't you play Arch and this and that, and you can go back and forth all the way around and listen to talk radio and watch every show and whomever else, or you can focus on the people in your building, keep your head down, make sure that you're providing the right type of motivation and leadership for them so that they can follow your lead. And I think our guys have done a great job of that.
All right, so what do the HQ folks have to say about it? We have Tom Fornelli and Shehan Jeyarajah joining us here to break down this matchup between Texas and Clemson. And let's start at the quarterback position, Shehan. What do you think that split between Ewers and Arch Manning should look like in this game?
Well, I do think we should see a little bit of Arch. I mean, what he brings to the table is he is a dual threat quarterback. He obviously, in the Texas A&M game, came in, scored a touchdown for them. But this is Quinn Ewers' team, and we can be excited about what Arch Manning is going to become and what talent that he has. But the reality is you have a third-year starting quarterback who's been there, done that, was one throw away from winning a college football playoff game last year, and is also, in so many ways, the emotional leader of the team. I understand why people want to see Arch Manning, but this is Quinn Ewers' team, and I think that he should get to see it through.
Yeah, I think when you look at the situation, like Shehan's right, Quinn is the starter. He is the guy going forward, but they do need to bring Arch in because the biggest problem that Texas has had offensively since Quinn came back from his injury is they can't finish drives in the red zone. And a big part of that is because Quinn is not at 100%. He had an oblique injury early in the year, which he's still dealing with. It's an injury that only heals when you're not, playing with rest and time. And he hasn't had nearly enough rest and time. And that affects you when the field gets shorter and you have to throw the ball into those tight windows and put a little extra juice on it. He doesn't have that available right now. So you've seen once Texas gets in that scoring zone, it's a whole lot of screen passes and it's a whole lot of fades to the back corner of the end zone, hoping his guy can make a play. And they just haven't done it frequently enough. So I think in that one area of the field, because Quinn's also added an ankle injury in the last month that he's had trouble dealing with, which has really limited his mobility, you haven't impacted your run game, which has been bad all season long due to injuries that you suffered before the year even began. That's where Arch Manning comes in handy. That's where we saw Arch Manning in that Texas A&M game, where Texas used him in the red zone to get a touchdown, to just make it 11-11, make the defense have to respect your quarterback as a rusher, to help your running backs, to help your offensive line, because they don't have to with Ewers. So while I can understand why Sark maybe doesn't want to listen to what everybody thinks, I guarantee you, he should probably listen to anybody who's telling him to use Arch Manning in the red zone more as a mobile running threat.
As it pertains to Ewers, take a look at some of the numbers that our research team put together, because usually right-handed quarterbacks are better rolling to their right. That's the easier throw, as opposed to maybe throwing across your body going the other way. But when you look at when he rolls out to the left, he hasn't thrown an interception this season, to 11 touchdowns. And Shehan, on the other side, he has more interceptions than touchdown passes when he rolls to the right. What do you make of those numbers?
Well, I think that that's just an indicator, right? That he's still not healthy. Obviously, he went out with that oblique injury, with that abdominal injury. And when you are a right-handed passer, right, you're having to twist more to go to your right. You're having to move your body a certain direction. When you're going to your left, you're going all the way across your body. You're mostly dealing with the left side of your body. To me, it's as simple as that. This is not a player who's fully healthy. I was talking to a recruiting analyst who dealt with him a lot in high school, and he actually had a similar oblique injury in his final season, his junior season at South Lake Carroll, and it was something that really did inhibit him when he went into the state championship game in 2021. I think that this is something that seems to be recurring for him. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten to see a fully healthy Quinn Ewers during any season that he's been a starting quarterback at Texas. He's missed games every single year. And look, that's something that you do have to adjust for. And that's something that is a legitimate concern heading into this matchup. But I do think that if you are Texas, again, like we kind of talked about, that's why I think in those high leverage situations, you do need to figure out what are ways that you can ease the impact on Quinn Ewers instead of putting everything on his shoulders.
Then on the other side, it's all on Cade Klubnik. And Tom, he's returning home, Austin native, going to be playing for the university there, the hometown university, against the Texas Longhorns in that stadium for the Clemson Tigers. Dabo Swinney has said that, they were the first unbeaten CFP champion, and now he wants to be the first 3-loss CFP champion. How much is this going to come down to Klubnik?
I think it all comes down to Klubnik. I think that has typically been the entire formula for Clemson's offense all season long. The run game has not been what they had hoped it would be at the running back position. They have not effectively enough replaced Will Shipley. Bo Maffa is a good running back, but we haven't seen the kind of explosive runs that he was displaying last year. Any explosive run we're seeing in this Clemson offense this season has typically been Cade Klubnik. The problem is the opponent has really largely dictated how effective that Cade Klubnik and the rest of the Tigers have been, because if you look at this team, if you look just points wise, they have played 5 games this season in which they've averaged 3 points or more per possession. They've also played 5 games where they've averaged fewer than 2 points per possession, and 3 of those games clearly were the games they lost against Georgia, Louisville, and South Carolina. What do those 3 teams have in common? They're the best defensive lines Clemson has seen all year. And now here comes the Texas Longhorns, who have an excellent defense, one of the best defenses in the country. They are very strong up front. So will we see this offensive line struggle again like we saw them struggle in those games? And can Cade overcome that and use his legs to keep drives alive? Because if we go back to that season opener against Georgia, which feels like years ago at this point, they were hopeless. They had absolutely no answers. We saw a bit more against Louisville, and we saw against South Carolina, they were able to move the ball. They just didn't finish by putting points on the board. So we've seen progress in that department, but if they're going to go into Austin and beat the Longhorns and move out of the second round, they need Cade to get the job done. He's going to have to put the team on his shoulders and get to the end zone.
It is the biggest spread of the first round. They're double-digit dogs, 11.5-point underdogs, and a double-digit dog has never won a CFP game. 0-8 straight up in CFP history. Shehan, who advances, who covers? What do you like in this one?
Well, I'll tell you what, this isn't the first time that Quinn Ewers and Cade Klubnik have played against each other with a lot on the line. I was actually at the building whenever they played in the state championship game back in 2021. Cade Klubnik took that one. He had a huge game. But this time, give me Quinn Ewers. He's got the better team this time around. I think that Texas probably needs to pull away late. This probably isn't going to be an easy game, but I think it comes down to one component, and that's Clemson's rushing defense. When Texas's rushing game has struggled, that's when you've seen their offense come to a halt. Clemson this year has probably the worst rushing defense that they've had. It's kind of since they've reached the national stage over a decade ago. Unfortunately, I think that means that Texas is going to be able to take advantage. I think that they win, and I think they cover.
All right. Looking forward to the matchup between shades of orange in Texas. It's burnt orange, it's Clemson Tiger orange, and it's on Saturday afternoon at 4 Eastern time as we kick off the first college football 12-team playoff with on-campus games. Only one more game to preview. It's bottom right. It's high noon in Happy Valley. Penn State and SMU. James Franklin gotten that label as a guy that can't win the big one. Penn State's accomplished a lot, but this would be the biggest win they've had in a long time, and they're expected to get it. Got one first-round game where a southern team goes up north to play in cold conditions, and that's SMU out of Dallas going up to Penn State, State College, Pennsylvania, where it's expected to be 25 degrees at kickoff, 10% chance of snow, and a wind around a 12-mile-an-hour or so. We got Tom Fornelli and Shehan Jeyarajah with us here. Tom, I was watching the coverage of the Minnesota-Wisconsin game, and I couldn't help but notice, you got Jacqueline D'Agostino, a Florida kid, coming up into the cold. People act differently. They act much differently. If they're in the South, they come up north in the wintertime. Is this going to be a problem for SMU? Their average kickoff temperature this season is over 72 degrees.
It is and it isn't. I mean, the wind, I think, is the biggest factor. The cold, you can get used to. It's when the gusts of wind start hitting you that you kind of just find yourself like tensing up and freezing up. But I think it's really important for SMU in this situation to get off to a good start in the game because of the weather. Like we saw in the ACC championship, they had a terrible start to the game. Clemson had 21 points before the first quarter was finished. If that similar kind of situation happens, if you're down in a hole in your SMU, it's the mental game of the weather. If you're cold and you're on the sidelines and you're down 2 scores early, you might quit. The doubt starts to creep in. You really don't want to be there, and things can, avalanche, to use the cold term. But I think if you get off to a fast start, honestly, it doesn't matter too much, because the more you're playing, like when you're playing football and you're out there doing anything athletic, you warm up. The cold really doesn't bother you. It's the sitting on the sidelines that can get to you. So if the confidence is going and they get off to a fast start, I do not think it will impact them. But again, it is important that they get off to a fast start, because if they don't, the mental game could kind of creep in.
Well, I'm sitting about 15 minutes away from SMU's campus right now. It's a pretty freezing 71 degrees yesterday, so I hope that that they weren't out practicing for this game there. But, look, I think that you're right. it's something that you just have to get used to over the course of a game. And I do think that they will. The one piece that I'm interested in is I think that where this impacts you most is when you're trying to move side to side versus north to south. As long as you keep things north-south, I don't think it matters too much. SMU's a really explosive team. They're a team that definitely makes a lot of quick cuts and things like that. So I think that maybe Penn State is built a little better for these conditions. At the same time, though, I expect SMU to adjust. I'm assuming that they're going to try to find ways to simulate the best that they can being in this cold weather. And I do think ultimately it's not going to be the thing that decides the game, but it could impact the game.
Yeah, something that also could impact the game is Penn State's backup quarterback situation, because we had Bo Pribula, their backup, who's played quite a bit this season and really had to come in and play a lot in a win against Wisconsin on the road earlier this year. Tom, he decides to go into the transfer portal, said it was a really difficult decision, but it's just a sign of the times, and he had to do it, according to him, and James Franklin's kind of on his side about this. But how could that impact this game?
I think it impacts it a lot because he is their backup quarterback, but he, like you said, he's been involved in a lot of packages, a lot of stuff that Penn State likes to do throughout the game. He's part of their red zone offense where they'll sometimes send Drew Eller out wide to play wide receiver and use Pribula as more of a mobile quarterback. Andy Kotelnicki is not shy about trying to get creative to find ways to just confuse defenses and give his teams, even if it's just for a fraction of a second, to cause a linebacker to stutter for one moment to open up a run lane for his team. He's not afraid to do that. So you take Pribula out of the equation, and it impacts their ability to do so. It's going to limit what they've been doing offensively all season. I think the counter will be, we've also seen Andy Kotelnicki use Tyler Warren a lot, both at, at center, at quarterback, at wide receivers, delivering concessions in the stands. They've lined up Tyler Warren everywhere. I think you will see an even larger role for Tyler Warren in this game to kind of replace Bo Pribula in that package.
Pribula had 3 carries for 12 yards in that Big Ten championship game against Oregon. And Shehan, a lot has been made about how Penn State's path appears easier than Oregon's path in this 6th seed spot, because you have SMU, then potentially Boise, then potentially a 2-loss Georgia team without Carson Beck, who's injured. Do they have the easiest path of anybody right now in the first round?
I think that there's a really good case that they do. Obviously, Texas is, as well gets Clemson and Arizona State. Those should be pretty manageable games. But, I think that the way that this bracket worked out for them just ended up being pretty positive. I mean, that 12 seed 2 being Clemson of all teams, a team that's been there, done that, makes it a little bit more complicated. And so to get SMU, a team that's just now transitioning up from the group of 5 level, and we'll be dealing with some depth issues, I imagine, over the course of the playoffs, along with Boise State in the next round, is going to be an interesting challenge. Now, I will say, in the next round, you get the Heisman runner-up in Ashton Jeanty. So I don't think that's going to be any sort of walk in the park, even if you beat SMU. But I do think that things worked out pretty nicely for them, which is not something that you could have anticipated necessarily for the number 6 seed.
To that point, Sportsline says the most likely championship matchup is Penn State against Texas due to the paths for those two teams. Let's go to the SMU side and talk about where this program has been. And Shehan, you talk about being just a few minutes away from campus right there and how far they have come. Of course, it goes back to the death penalty and then relative obscurity for quite some time. And then making this kind of jump their very first year in a power conference. How did they do it?
Well, I think it's kind of perfect that that this team is making this jump at this time. I started as a college football writer in the state of Texas back in 2018, which was the year that Sonny Dykes was hired. And I kind of view that as the start of their modern era in terms of building up to this point. Of course, Sonny Dykes really elevated them, taking them to 10 wins for the first time since the 80s. Rhett Lashley takes them to their first conference championship since the 1980s, and now they're in the college football playoff for the first time. So it's been a meteoric rise. This was a team that I was excited about coming into the year, but not one that I thought would have the depth and the talent to make it all the way to the college football playoff. They've stepped up and handled every single challenge put in front of them to this point. They beat TCU, a team that won 8 games by 24 points. They absolutely crushed Pitt. And look, they started slow, and I think the moment was a little big for them in the ACC championship game, but they managed to come back, and it took a 56-yard field goal to beat them, even after they outgained Clemson by over 100 yards. So this is a team that's talented. They're stocked with a lot of players who are blue chip recruits coming out of high school that have developed in a big way there. Elijah Roberts on the defensive line is a name to know. They made a quarterback change earlier in the season, going from a former blue chip Preston Stone to a hometown kid, Kevin Jennings, who led South Oak Cliff to a state title. So they're just a team that's really motivated, and I know they're excited for this moment.
And 3-0 straight up as an underdog this season. Wins against Tulane, TCU, and Louisville. The line is 8.5, Tom. Who do you like and who advances?
I think Penn State ultimately ends up winning the game, and I do think they cover. I just think that they have a little too much offensively for the Mustangs here. I don't think it's a great matchup for SMU, but I also do like the over a bit for this one. I think the Mustangs will be able to move the ball a bit themselves. It could be higher scoring despite the weather than most people think.
All right, Tom Fornelli and Shehan Jeyarajah with us here on CBS Sports HQ, previewing the first round games in the college football playoff. Of course, the Cover 3 podcast will go even more in depth this week and all throughout the college football playoff. First game is on Friday. 3 more follow on Saturday.